This two materials. And again, I just want to point out that as we're, if I know I've been in a meeting and I'm about to ask a question, we jump to the next topic, like, oh, okay. There's no, it all blends together. So don't ever hesitate to say, well, wait a second, you were talking about that, or I know you're on materials, but I had a question on anything, anytime. So, and nice work on the chat there. So let me just check that and see where we're at. On our materials, it's critical to understand what we're drying because materials will respond differently to water, and that will have a big impact on what we can dry or if we should dry it. OSB, oriented strand board. 3/4 inch OSB is going to dry differently than 3/4 inch plywood or 3/4 inch Advantech plywood. 3/4 inch plywood is going to dry differently than inch and an eighth plywood, right? So the type of material, and I can dry OSB very effectively. I can dry plywood very effectively. Particle board, sawdust and glue, that's going in the trash, right? MDF, medium density fiberboard, great for baseboards. When it gets wet, I can't save it. It's going to swell very quickly. So when I look at materials, what I'm saying is I've got a stack of drywall, a box of screws, a stack of 2x4s, whatever. Those are building materials. A roll of insulation. The type of materials will have an impact on what or if or how I can dry it. When we take those and I say, okay, I have my subfloor right here. I'm going to put a 2x4 on top of that. That would be my bottom plate. I'm going to put a bunch of 2x4s on top of that as studs. I'm going to screw some drywall into it. I have assembled those materials into a wall. Call that a wall assembly. Our buildings are full of all sorts of assemblies. Wall assemblies and floor assemblies and ceiling assemblies and stair assemblies, a lot of different assemblies. Well, the type of assembly will have a huge impact on what I can or if I can or if I'm able to dry something. Let's say that this wall right here was this wall assembly. Steel studs, 1/2 inch drywall, flat paint, no insulation. I can dry that really easily. Metal's going to dry quickly. The drywall's going to dry quickly. The flat paint's not really going to hold the moisture in. I can dry that pretty well. But let's say now that this wall is this wall assembly, where I've got maybe 2x6 framing. I've got insulation with a fiberglass insulation with a paper backing on it. I've got 2 layers of drywall with a vinyl wallpaper. That's not going to dry very well at all, right? So our job is to dry stuff. As restorers, our job is to save stuff. Sometimes we can save it directly. Sometimes we got to rip out something else to save something else. So vinyl floors, they're great for kitchens and bathrooms. The kids splash water out of the tub on the vinyl floor in the bathroom. You get a towel and wipe it up. No harm, no foul. Water overflows the sink in the kitchen on the vinyl floor. You wipe it up. It's a term we'll come to here pretty soon is non-permeable. It's waterproof. Water can't go through that floor. Great thing to have in kitchens and bathrooms. But now you've got a broken pipe and water flows across that floor to the edges and soaks underneath it. Well, now that floor is doing its job in reverse, and I'm not going to get any moisture out of there. I have to rip out the vinyl and the underlayment, Luan or particle board, depending on what part of the country you're in, so I can dry the subfloor. Many times I can dry drywall in place. But if there's a vinyl wallpaper on here and wet insulation in the wall, I got to rip out the drywall, rip out the insulation to save the framing and the sheeting. So we're always drying something, but sometimes we got to rip out something to dry or save something else. It all depends upon the materials and the assemblies that we're up against. And you'll see a lot of, this right here, this example of double framing. Any ideas why they would frame the wall that way with 2 sets of studs and some space in between? I didn't know. I had to look it up. There's a couple of reasons. One is the one that I know of is one to square the room up. I love that. Yeah. So you can, because it's amazing. It's so funny. When I was building houses, whoever screws up, it's the guy. Oh, the drywall's fine. The framer screwed up. Oh, the framer's like, no, no, the framing's fine. The guy who put the concrete, they screwed it all up. So it was somebody else's fault. But the other thing too is if you are in a hotel or a conference room or something, if you put the double wall in, the sound doesn't travel because the sound waves go through this framing. And so if you put a space in there, it's a way to keep it much, much quieter on surrounding spaces. One of the reasons they do that. So wall assemblies, floor assemblies, Do I have plywood and hardwood or plywood and carpet and pad or some other subfloor OSB or whatever with backer board or thick set or mud set and tile or stone or whatever? Or do I have concrete with carpet, pad, hardwood, whatever? So I've got to know what I'm up against. And then other assemblies. So this floor, these are called TJIs. You get a crawl space down below there, metal framing in here, and then the stair assembly. So what if I've got, wet surf, water down around here? I have to find out if the water has gone underneath those stairs. Any thoughts on how I would do that? How do I test to see if there's water underneath those stairs? And what are you seeing out there sometimes? So yeah, moisture meter. Perfect answer. Absolutely. How do I get my moisture meter underneath there? I've got this big I've got wood. So this wood floor goes underneath the stairs. How do I get underneath there to check it and see if it's wet or not with my moisture meter? I guess I could take up the carpet, start ripping out plywood, but that doesn't seem like the best. The first place I would start is I'm going to go down in the crawl space and come up underneath with my meter in that area. If it is wet and I've got to get airflow in there, on the side over here, there's going to be drywall. So I can cut into that drywall. Now I can see underneath the stairs, have access to get airflow. I can crawl in between the studs and get my meter in there and do it. And I've done that a lot. In this particular application, however, once I do that, now I'm doing a drywall repair and I'm probably going to have to paint, a lot of walls to match that to get in there. Underneath the stairs over here, there's almost always a closet. If I pull the stuff out of the closet and go to the back of the closet and tear out the drywall, now I've got the same access and maybe I'm painting a closet after the drywall. So I'm always mindful in saying, I'm about to do this, but when I do this, someone has to put it back together. How do I make that easier? We should always have that in mind on demolition is how do we make it easier? I'm going to talk more about that on Wednesday. But I've got to figure out, wherever the water could have gone, I have to get there, even if it's not easy to get to. Another term I want you to be familiar with is called hygroscopic materials. So hygroscopic materials can gain or lose moisture in the air as they equalize. And so hygroscopic, we know, for example, the hardwood is hygroscopic. It can absorb moisture into the air or release moisture to the air, depending on whether the air is wetter or drier than the hardwood is. Otherwise, it couldn't acclimate. This is pretty dense. This takes a while, 5, 6, 7 days typically to allow this to do that. Cardboard is going to acclimate very quickly, right? It's going to very quickly absorb or desorb water from the surrounding space. So hygroscopic materials, this plastic is not hygroscopic. Moisture, it might accumulate on the outside if it's cold, but otherwise the water would come out of it. So anything that's hygroscopic can add in or release moisture from what's happening in the air as it tries to equalize and reach equilibrium in hygroscopic materials. And so if you think about it, I mentioned that if we go to, between Miami and Phoenix, we'll feel the difference in our skin. If you get out of the shower in the morning and you towel off, and now the towel is wet because the water that was on you is on the towel. You take your wet towel and hang it over the towel bar. You go downstairs, have breakfast, go to work, come home, have dinner, go to bed, wake up the next morning, and you go in to take a shower, and that towel that was wet yesterday is now dry. Why is that towel dry? Because it's a magic towel. No, because the air was dry and the towel was wet. It just evaporated, dried itself out. If you were to take that same dry towel and go sit in a wet steam sauna for half an hour and put the towel on a hook and sit there and then reach for that towel, it's going to be damp because the air is wet and the towel is dry. They're going to equalize. And that's happening with our materials all the time. Leading cause of dry skin is towels. I'll bet that's true. I bet that's exactly true. um, and so anyhow, that's what's happening with our materials. And again, that's what we want to control to dry our materials out. So if there's excess moisture in the air, you'll see it become damaged. In Reno, Nevada, we don't have a lot of mold on the outside of our buildings. You go to Florida, there's a lot, right? Because the air is so wet all the time because of that ocean that they're storing there next to it. This is a general thing I'm about to say. I want you to be aware of it, and it's important. But when you get above about 66% relative humidity, you can start to have what we call secondary damage, additional damage from the water. We'll talk more about that, like microbial growth. Now, I want to point out a couple of things. That does not simply mean, oh my gosh, it's 66% relative humidity. Where's the mold? That is 66% relative humidity at equilibrium. I have a slide coming up later on what's called equilibrium relative humidity and equilibrium moisture content. One of my materials are at equilibrium. So it's not just if it's 66% relative humidity. Okay, thank you for that. Well, one moment. And then let me know when you come back on. A lot of times you can tell the restart, you can say, "Hey, can I do this in an hour?" Sometimes it'll ask and you can say later today, but if you can't, you can't. And I don't know how long that restart's going to take. So when you're done, send me an email if you would and just say, I was on hydroscopic materials or I was on whatever when my computer shut down and I saw this when I came back, and then I'll figure it out for you. So thank you for that information. But yeah, send it to me in an email or let me know when you're done. So if I'm at 66% and it's been 66% long enough that the moisture in the air has moved into the materials and now they're at equilibrium. And it's a really simple thing. What we're talking about is don't worry about this, I'm just sharing it. It's the available water activity that allows for microbial to growth, and that has to be at about 0.66 water activity. It's directly related to the relative humidity. If it's 70% relative humidity at equilibrium, it's zero point 0.7 water activity in the materials. Okay. So when I say 66%, I'm saying that's kind of the lowest potential. Let me give you an example. You're on the freeway. The speed limit is 65 miles an hour. If you're in a 65-mile-an-hour speed limit zone on the freeway and you're doing 66, could you get a ticket? Technically, yes, you could. Are you going to? The chances are pretty darn slim. But if you're doing 70 or 80 or 90, you're probably going to get a ticket. The same thing here at 66%. Could I get microbial growth? Yes, it's possible. Will I? Probably not. 70, 80, 90, yes. Very good chance I'm going to start to have a problem there. So 66% is just that kind of entry point, and that's not static because different environments around the country. But just that's a number to kind of be aware of. The bottom line is the more moisture that's available, the better chance for microbial growth. Whether it's humidity or in the materials or ultimately humidity into the materials. So a way to remember the term hygroscopic, we hear oftentimes hydro with a D meaning water, hydroelectric dam. This is hygro with a G. If the moisture gets too high, things can start to grow that are microscopic. We don't want that. So the term grow, spelled incorrectly, is right in the middle of the word, and that's what we don't want to have happen. Something else to be aware of is the relationship that the water has with materials. We have what's called bound water and we have free water. Excuse me, there's also what we refer to as surface water, which is on the surface, but we lump free and surface water together. So the bound water is what's held, as it says, within the actual structure of the material, and it is bound to the cell walls. And so, for example, I have here this little piece of cardboard. And if you look at this piece of cardboard, it is corrugated. So it has this down here just a little bit. If you look at the cardboard, you can see I have cardboard here and cardboard here, and then a little corrugation going inside the cardboard. So if I soak this with water, this would fill up, this would soak up water, this would soak up water, and then all these little pieces of cardboard inside would soak up water. But eventually, all these gaps and holes would also fill up with water. And so if we look at this, what we're really saying here is, let me bring this back here. So I have my cardboard. It's corrugated. Must still be on. Oh, okay, okay. Sorry. If I'm still on that color. Okay. Put my cardboard back here, my corrugation in the cardboard, and water starts to soak up into the cardboard. So water absorbs into the cardboard, water absorbs into the cardboard, water absorbs into the cardboard, and now the cardboard's full, it's saturated. It cannot hold any more water. But water sticks to water and water sticks to stuff. So other water is going to start to fill in the gaps, holding on to the water, holding on to the cardboard, right? That's my free water. If this was a piece of wood, I'm going to have water that soaks into the wood until it's full. It can't hold anymore. That's my bound water. Okay, when this gets cut down as a tree, it's soaking wet. They do one or two things. They do what's called stickering, where they stack it with little spacers or stickers in between it and give it a couple months to dry out, or they put it in a kiln and make it happen much faster at 400 degrees. But they've had to take that water and get it all out of there. Now, because of water damage, water gets back in and it rebonds. It likes being there. It's very happy. And so we have what's called the fiber saturation point right here. Let me get back to my ink color that I want. We have the fiber saturation point right here at about 26 to 32% moisture content. For Doug fir, it's about 26%. So when I put my meter in here and it says 26% or less, that's indicating bound water. That's the water that's reestablished a chemical or molecular connection or bond and it doesn't want to leave. Anything above that is just in the gaps and in the holes. And so when I'm drying it out, you'll see a huge difference. This might not be the very best example, but I'm going to try it anyhow and see if it will work here. I've got this thing with a cup of water in it, and I'm going to pour this container into this container. You can see how easily that water left the container. Very simple. But if you look in here, there's still some bits of water around the outside of the plastic. It didn't all pour out, some stuck to the plastic. If I wanted to get the water off the plastic here, I would have to get a towel and wipe it out, or I'd have to get a hair dryer and evaporate, I guess. Well, with bound water, the water coming out of the pores and the capillaries, the free water, it's coming out very, very easily. I'm almost pouring it out. I put an air mover on there and it's coming out very quickly. The stuff that's stuck to the side, I got to figure out a better way and get more aggressive to do that. And so the bound water, the free water, like I said, you get a milkshake. You put a straw in the milkshake and suck on it. You get a mouthful of milkshake. Life's pretty good. That goes on for a little while, but pretty soon you got some milkshake on the bottom rim of the cup and around the side. And if you want that milkshake, which I think it's pretty obvious I do, now you're chasing with the straw. You're sucking real hard, moving the straw. You're working a lot harder for a lot less milkshake. The bound water, you're working a lot harder for a lot less water. So I'm going to show up on a job site on day one. I'm going to extract the water from the carpet. I'm going to fold the carpet back to save it. I'm going to pull the pad out and throw it away. I'm going to take a reading on my floor and it says it's 78% moisture. Okay, and write that down. I put in all my equipment. I come back the next day and it's gone down to 38%. Woohoo, look at me go. I'm awesome. I'm good. I come back the next day and I've gone from 38 to 29, 31. I'm like, what the heck? What the heck was you got all the milkshake out on day one. Now you're going for the hard stuff, the stuff that's bound. So on day one or day two, you're going to see a huge drop and then slow a couple percentage points, 3, 4, 5 points a day, because now you're trying to break the bond with that water that doesn't want to leave again. And that's my bound water. And that's like I said, below, on average, bound water is at about 30% of our fiber saturation, where the fibers are saturated. I've got everything else that's in there. So free water comes out pretty quick. But I need to understand that when I'm drying it. And if you look at the pine, softwood, has got a lot of pores and a lot of wood. Hardwood, there's pores, but it's so much denser that it's harder to dry. Generally speaking, the easier it is for water to get into a material, the easier it is to get back out and dry. Carpet gets wet very fast, carpet dries very fast. Hardwood plaster framing gets wet slow, dries slow. Got to work it, goes in a lot faster than it comes back out. So, right. And then just something else to be aware of. Just look at one thing here real quick, if I can find my mouse. There we go. Okay, perfect. Just looking at the time before we got a break coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Also, just a couple other terms to be aware of are permeance and porosity. I think most of us know porosity. If something's porous, it can hold more moisture. A sponge, very porous, soaks up water very quickly. Hardwood, very dense, soaks it up slower. And then permeance is a rating for how well moisture can move through a solid material. And so if you look over here, 1 inch of air is at 120. That's kind of the high end saying that's not slowing down moisture at all. 6 mil polyolefin sheeting is 0.06. It's kind of a 0 to 120 scale. Poly sheeting, which is designed that moisture can't go through it, still has a tiny bit of moisture. Those little tiny molecules finding a way through where air's going. Yeah, we're not going to slow it down at all. And so fiberglass insulation without paper is 116. Vapor moves to that just almost just as easy as air. Drywall, 3/8 drywall is 50. Now that's a little thinner than we'd normally use, and that's no paint or coating on there. Moisture can move through drywall pretty easily. So I really have to know if something is non-permeable, we call it a vapor barrier or oftentimes a vapor retarding material. Like when there's a forest fire, the big tanker airplane goes over, drops all that, orange fire retardant on there because it's going to stop or keep the fire from progressing. A vapor retardant stops or keeps the vapor from progressing. If something's a vapor barrier, like a latex paint or a wallpaper, I can't dry through it. I have to dry from the other side or tear something out to get there. So I have to understand permeance and permeability of my materials, what the perm rating is. So things that are non-permeable, vinyl wallpaper, vinyl floors, certain coat, paints and sealers, insulation with a paper or a metal foil backing on it, things like that. And then just so you're aware, in the 30 seconds I have left before the break, I also in all my classes teach about subrogation. It's not part of water damage, but I basically look, if you're in the restoration field, you need to understand you don't throw away the washing machine hose caused the problem. You don't throw away the toaster oven that caused the fire. You got to hang on to it because that can cost an insurance company thousands and thousands of dollars. So I won't go into it deeper than that because you're all aware of subrogation, but I want to make sure that our contractors do understand how an insurance company can have a legal right to go after something, through that process. So, all right, we're going to